Xây tương thân tình trong đạo Phật, tùy khác màu nhưng một tôn sư. Hôm nay đây cùng nhau họp mặt, quyết noi theo đường Phật giáo Hoàng Dương.
Thank you. Welcome after the commercials. Angji, do you want to start out with the next question?
Yeah. So we were going in the past just talking about what it means to change and what everyone's kind of the inside feeling that the Buddha talked about are discontent, and each one of us wants to be better, wants to do better, or some of us are at the stage where we perceive as being better, yet they're depressed. So as we go on in this stage, I feel it draws a lot of connection to many of the if our Western audiences are watching. So like I said further, for example, if someone was already perceived as having everything, and what can they practice if you know they've got an education ready and they have this successful job, but they still feel this sort of depression inside that sometimes I feel talking to the people. I perceive them as having much success, but inside they feel lost as well, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a really great question, because a lot of people that I've talked and a lot of people that I've dealt with over the past few years is that no matter how much money you have, you know, if you're like a millionaire or even a billionaire, mm-hmm. having all that financial security doesn't necessarily mean it will bring you happiness. Mm-hmm. Because happiness here, how the Buddha taught, is from the inside. You cannot be bought. You cannot have $1 million and buy happiness from someone. Mm-hmm. And even though if you do have $1 million and you buy a fancy car, your happiness might be a split second.
Yeah, like
and over time, that even though you bought a fancy car, now you start to live your life in worrying about the car. Is my car going to get scratched? Is my car going to get stolen? Is my car someone's going to hit my car and ruin my car? Is my insurance going to go up? There's a lot of things you got to worry about when you buy an expensive car. Mm-hmm. Or when you start to win the lottery, you have a lot of money. Then you start to wondering if anyone's going to steal my money. If are my friends going to be faithful, or are they just there they just want something from me? Right. Is my family member is going to be the one that's going to harm me to get my money? And you start to think about all these negative things, even though you have a lot of money, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to bring a lot of happiness within your life. So the problem is that how can someone who has a lot of money or has everything that's set, has a degree,
or on the way to school,
on
the path of something that they've dreamt of, but yet,
how can they live a life of abundance and all that stuff, right? Well, that's where I said earlier was to practice meditation. Now, the word meditation here means different things to different people. It can mean observing the breath in and out. It can mean picturing the Buddha within your mind, or following the chakra, or following the breath into your stomach and holding within your stomach and breathing out. There's different types of meditation. But the meditation here that I want to share is Anapana meditation, which is, Anapana means in and out. Meditation is, observing the breath in and out. And by doing so, you start to become aware of all the sensation that happens within the body. But most importantly, when you start to become aware of the sensation, you develop what you call mindfulness. And the mindfulness here is being aware at the very moment, at this present moment, in the now. At this very moment, you start to become aware. Okay, the best way I can describe this is this. If I have a snow globe and I were to shake it, what happens?
It wouldn't be all cloudy.
Cloudy, right? Now, if I were to put that snow globe down and I touch it for 5 minutes, what happened?
It'll start to settle down.
It'll start to settle down. At the moment when it's settling down, you can see very clearly through the snow globe, right? So when you start to observe the breath, your mind will start to settle down, and eventually your mind becomes very clear. You start to see everything, right? What happens when I start to shake a little bit? Then the snowflakes on the bottom starts to rise up a little bit. It doesn't fly everywhere. It just kind of rise up. That rising up, you start to see, even though it's just one or two, you can see it, right? When your mind is clear and you're practicing mindfulness at this very moment, then you start to be aware of anger, greed, ignorance that arise, even though it's just a little bit. You see it arise. we all have negative feelings. We all have negative thoughts. It's what makes us human. But be aware of the negative thoughts that arise at this very moment, because at that very moment is when it's weakest. It's when it's the weakest. When it's the weakest, then you can either cut it, remove it, or just observe it and let it just naturally go away through the laws of what?
Laws of impermanence.
Laws of impermanence, that everything constantly changes. And so when you start to become aware of greed, anger, and ignorance that arises, you start to respond to it positively. And eventually it arises only to pass away. Right? And so it doesn't matter if you have all the money in the world. If you do not tend to your spiritual self, then you're always going to live a life of like emptiness. And emptiness here is not the profound meaning of Buddhism. It means that you're empty inside.
Yeah.
And you feel very hollow. And you start to fill up this void within yourself with drugs, with money, with sex, with women, with men, with whatever, all these things to fill it up within this void that you have. But only all that, chasing the wrong things will only lead you to suffering, misery, anger. And then eventually you start to loathe yourself for doing all those things.
Right.
And you go down this very dark path that will not be very beneficial to you, but rather be harmful to you in the long run.
Yeah, so excellent explanation, because as we were talking earlier, those that feel they should change, meditate, see as you calm down, what do you truly want? What do you truly have to offer for others? Or maybe for another person, if they have a lot of different things and yet they still feel empty, it's like, okay, so what's wrong with what I have? Because I'm not sure. I'm going to say a quote now, and if you want to show me if it's right or not, is this: it's not that a man has very little, but a man that craves more, that is actually the poor one. And so if it's under your understanding in Buddhism, we try to limit those kinds of desires for money and materialism and even sensual pleasures. But of course that pathway isn't for everyone, but it's worth observing, and it's worth noticing that if you practice these techniques, then you'll have a much more peaceful and happiness life. But of course, as we have our Buddhist layman watching, or anyone, then meditation and noticing the framework of what your desires are, the framework of what your greed wants to attain, and exterminating that has many benefits. And if they practice that month to month, daily, with your a momentum kind of story, then it plungers off to this whole future that we cannot believe any person that follows it will reach into the next point of their lives. So hopefully people are inspired to make the change, and if they feel also depressed from what they've had, make that change as well. We always feel that discontent with what many of us feel.
Yes.
And if we move forward into practicing Dharma, we can change it. But so my last question for now is mindfulness and feeling about that. So can you go a little bit deeper now, that if we have a few moments, about doing the technique to settle down your thoughts? Like, is it just merely sitting still in an environment, or just listening to music for some others, or?
Well, there's different things, and different people have different ways to deal with stress. Some people go for a long drive. Some people go and just listen to music. Some people just read a book. Some people like to go to the beach. Some people like to become alone and just be by themselves. But any of those techniques that you do, say, for example, you're listening to music, then while the moment of you listening to your music, you're just letting go of all your thoughts and just observing it with your ears, right? If you're reading a book, then you're letting go of all your thoughts and you're observing everything with your eyes. The meditation here that I showed earlier is that you start to observe everything that's going on within your breath. And it doesn't matter if you're old, you're young, you're fat, you're skinny, you're tall, you're short. Anyone that's breathing can use the breath. And the breath becomes an anchor for you to always reel in. Like, no matter how fast the boat is going, you drop an anchor, right? The boat's going to stop. Right? No matter how much the monkey is jumping from tree to tree, branch to branch, you grab its tail and you pull it down, it's not going to go anywhere. Right? And so the mind works the same way. It's going to jump here and there. You're going to start to meditate, and then you're thinking here and you're thinking there. Always return back to the breath and becoming aware of this breath that you have very consistently from the moment of from the moment of birth until the moment you pass away. This breath that you have is very consistent, and so you start to observe it more and more. Breathe in, breathe out. Be aware of the breath. Once your mind becomes very calm, then you start to observe all of the sensations, whether it's hot, it's cold, it's itchy, it's numbing, whether it's greed, anger, and ignorance, whether it's happiness, whether it's anger, whatever sensation, whatever feelings that arise. Only when you're practicing mindfulness, where you have the ability to always respond positively instead of reacting negatively. But unfortunately, we don't have much time to continue further. We'll continue with this topic within the next week, and hopefully during this time you will always take the teachings of the Buddha and diligently practice it very consistently. Only through your own practice will you see that your life will start to change from a negative to a positive. So we hope to see you next week. Namo Buddhaya Thích Ca Mâu Ni Phật.
Xây tương thân tình trong đạo Phật tùy khác màu.